I pushed open the front door, each step heavier than the last. The surgery had left me fragile, my body aching in ways I had never known, but my spirit clung to hope. A hope for a warm word, a friendly face, perhaps even a small show of care from those I had given everything to. Instead, I was met with an eerie silence, colder than the winter chill that crept beneath the door's edges. The house I had built with my hands and filled with memories was now strange, unwelcoming. My belongings were no longer arranged carefully inside. They had been cast like discarded tools into the garage, piled haphazardly as if I had become nothing more than clutter to be swept aside. A crude note was taped to the door, the paper torn raggedly, as if in haste or anger. "It's just," it read, 3 simple words dripping with dismissal, unfinished as if the thought had been too painful or unnecessary to complete. I traced the fading ink with fingers that trembled, the silence behind those words louder than any shouted insult. It was not mere neglect. It was a statement, a cold severing of ties, an announcement that I was no longer part of the home I had once known as my sanctuary. From inside, I heard their voices, the voices of my children, once the light of my life, now sharp and brittle. Michael's tone carried a biting impatience, as if my existence was an annoyance interfering with his plans. Sarah's laughter was light, almost mocking, an echo that cut through the walls and settled deep in my chest. They spoke without invitation, their words not to me but about me, a presence unworthy of respect or acknowledgement. I caught phrases that twisted like knives, complaints about financial burdens, plans made without me, judgments passed with arrogance. They treated me as a problem to be managed, an obsolete burden to be discarded quietly rather than confronted. My heart clenched, a sinister weight pressing down on my chest. The house I had worked tirelessly to build, the nights I spent aching with hunger so they could eat, those sacrifices rendered invisible. The foundation beneath my feet seemed to crumble, replaced by cold, hard reality. I'd been cast aside like yesterday's rubbish, a forgotten relic in a family that once thrived on trust and love. Yet beneath the ache, a slow, fierce fire began to burn. I would not allow this to break me. My mind, trained by decades of engineering precision and shaped by years of quiet endurance, began to assess the situation with clarity. This was not some mere oversight or lapse of kindness. It was an unmistakable signal. I was considered obsolete, a ghost whose presence was no longer desired. I tried to speak, to reach them, to remind them of the blood and sweat woven into our shared history. But my words bounced off closed doors and eyes glazed in entitlement, met with thin, dismissive replies that cut deeper than any wound. For a moment, a wave of helplessness threatened to drown me, but I forced my breath steady and my hands unclenched the air. This was not the end I had imagined during the long nights when I had lain vulnerable and hoping for care. No longer would patience or silent suffering be my refuge. I swallowed the sting of betrayal and let the garage door fall shut with a resounding thud, the iron gate between the family I once called mine and the man I was left to become. Standing there in the dim light of the garage, surrounded by what remained of my life's work, I was alone but not defeated. The humiliation was sharp and bitter, but it stirred within me a fierce clarity and resolve. The family I had sacrificed everything for had turned their backs, but I would not fade quietly into that darkness. The silence and humiliation would not define me. Instead, they marked the end of one chapter and the hard, unyielding beginning of another. In the stillness, I sensed the first stirrings of a relentless determination, a quiet storm gathering beneath the calm surface. My story, battered yet unbroken, was far from over. It was only unfolding with a new purpose, shaped by betrayal but destined for justice. The garage was cold and cluttered, an echo of the life I had spent decades building, reduced to a shadowed corner filled with forgotten belongings. My body, still recovering from surgery, protested every movement, but it was the ache in my heart that weighed heaviest. Sitting on that worn workbench, the memories began to unfold, a lifetime of sacrifice and love playing out in my mind, like faint blueprints, fragile but undeniable. I remembered those endless days and long nights spent working, inventing, and providing. Every project, every paycheck had been offered for one purpose: to give my children a future better than the one I had. I had labored under oppressive lights and manned machines, also Michael and Sarah could go to school, grow up without want, and live dreams I only glimpsed. The house itself was a testament to that life, a sanctuary built with calloused hands, each nail driven with hope and care. The image of Maria came to me, her warmth a beacon during cold, dark times. She had been the heart of this family, the steady hand that balanced our trials. Yet now she was gone, and with her absence the air in this home felt thinner, colder, as if stripped of its soul. But despite those sweet memories, the present was sharp and unforgiving. The family I had nurtured now treated me as if I were a stranger, an obstacle to be ignored or dealt with dismissively. The torn note on the door was a symbol of that cold dismissal, not just words written hastily, but a reflection of their deep disregard. Their voices from inside, laced with impatience and entitlement, confirmed what I feared. I was no longer seen as their father, but as a burden. That realization cut deep, a betrayal sharper than any physical pain. Every sacrifice I had made, every harsh day endured silently for their sake, seemed to vanish under their disdain. The man who had given his life to build a home and hold a family together was pushed aside like yesterday's refuse. Still, amid the sting of this abandonment, a slow but fierce fire kindled within me. Though shaken, I was not broken. My mind, trained by the rigors of engineering and strengthened through decades of quiet fortitude, began to assess the reality before me with clear eyes. This was not simple neglect, it was a deliberate dismissal, a signal that I had become irrelevant to a family that once depended on me. Their rejection was total and personal. I tried to break through, to speak the language of love and sacrifice that had once held us close, but my words were met with cold indifference. Eyes once bright with trust now glazed over with entitlement, dismissing me with a casual cruelty more painful than any insult. Their rejection was complete, a wall built with disdain and selfishness. For a moment, the weight of helplessness threatened to drown me. The thought of fading quietly into this shadow, of allowing my dignity to crumble under their disregard, was unbearable. I steadied my breathing, clenched and unclenched my hands, and forced a calm that was more armor than peace. This could not, would not, be the closing line of my story. I pulled the garage door closed behind me with a firm, deliberate motion, its heavy thud a definitive end to the chapter of neglect and broken family ties. Surrounded by the relics of a life's work, I was alone but far from defeated. The humiliation was bitter, but it sparked within me a newfound clarity and resolve. The family I had given everything to had turned their backs, yet I refused to disappear quietly into that darkness. Silence and hurt would no longer define me. Instead, they marked the beginning of something new, an unyielding chapter forged in the fire of betrayal. In the stillness beneath the weight of sorrow, I felt the stirrings of a relentless determination. My battered spirit found a spark of hope, a quiet storm gathering beneath the calm. I was bruised but unbroken, and my journey was shifting toward justice. I began reflecting on the lessons I had taught my children, the quiet talks about responsibility, the hard-earned wisdom about planning and accountability. Those teachings had been cast aside, replaced by arrogance and greed. But hidden beneath their bravado, I sensed cracks, careless handling of money, forgotten debts, reckless decisions that they had masked with bravado and entitlement. As I pieced together these faint threads, a patchwork of vulnerability appeared beneath their confident exteriors. I resolved to turn these weaknesses into strength, not through anger or confrontation, but through measured, calculated action. Every sacrifice and every unspoken pain forged the foundation of a plan. I would wield my knowledge of finance and law like tools refined by years of experience, crafting a response not of impulsive wrath, but of patient, strategic precision. The night deepened, but within me a steady resolve burned brighter. I was no longer a man resigned to suffering. I was a strategist preparing to reclaim what was mine. This was a battle not of force but of intellect, a slow, relentless reclamation of dignity and justice. Surrounded by the relics of my life and the weight of betrayal, I felt the cusp of transformation. My story, though scarred and battered, was far from over. It was evolving into something stronger, tempered by heartache, but destined for righteousness. The memories of betrayal would no longer weaken me. They would be the bedrock upon which I rebuilt my future. I was ready to move beyond pain and silence, ready to face the coming days with the quiet power of a man who knows his worth and refuses to be undone. This was only the beginning. The days after the surgery blurred together, each one a mixture of physical weakness and mental sharpening. While my body recovered slowly, my mind grew more focused, fueled by the cold reality I had uncovered. I had not expected the betrayal to cut so deep, nor to ignite such a fierce resolve. The fragments of overheard conversations haunted me. Michael and Sarah plotting in hushed tones, treating me as an inconvenient expense rather than the man who had carried this family on his back. To hear them refer to me as an old bill to pay was like a fresh wound opening across an old scar. That moment was definitive. A lifetime of quiet sacrifices, swallowing anger and disappointment, gave way to a cold, clear focus. I was no longer the defeated man who endured without complaint. I was someone who understood the weight of betrayal and the power of strategy. My years of engineering discipline, the exactness, the planning, the understanding that every problem had a solution, now formed the backbone of a plan that was steady, patient, and relentless. It began with reflection. I recalled all the lessons I had tried to pass on to my children, the careful talk of responsibility, the importance of foresight, the need to plan and account carefully for every resource. Those speeches, once welcomed or tolerated, had been discarded along with gratitude. Arrogance and greed had crept into their minds, cloaked in entitlement. But beneath their confident front, I sensed cracks. Their careless spending, the debts they ignored or buried, the long-forgotten contracts left unsigned. It was as if their arrogance had blinded them to the very fragility of their claims. I began to piece together these concealed flaws, the patchwork of vulnerabilities behind their shields of bravado. This was my doorway in, not through confrontation or anger, but with cold calculation and knowledge I had spent years acquiring. Days were spent poring over documents, bills, contracts, bank statements, anything that spoke of financial mismanagement or deception. I dusted off old records, compared figures, retraced transactions with the precision I had once used to draft engineering plans. Suspicious entries lit up like warning signs, inflated expenses, irregular payments, loans taken without authorization. Their hubris had left trails that a careful eye could follow. As I traced these dark threads, my purpose clarified. This was about more than money. It was about justice. Every sacrifice I had made, every sleepless night and empty meal, had been meant to build and protect this family. The betrayal I now faced demanded a response not born of rage, but of righteous, calculated effort. With each uncovered detail, my confidence grew. I was no longer a victim silently accepting injustice. I was preparing a silent counterattack, building a case strong enough to dismantle their reckless plans piece by piece. I also rekindled connections forged over a lifetime. Trusted lawyers, financial advisors, auditors, people who understood the delicate balance of law and finance. I met with them discreetly, explaining the situation with measured calm and asking for guidance. Their insights gave me further tools, legal angles I had not considered, regulatory mechanisms I could invoke, tactical advice on how to proceed without alerting my children to the gathering storm. The house, my home, was at the core of this battle. They saw it as a mere asset to be quickly sold for gain. To me, it was a fortress of memories, the physical monument to decades of labor and love. Each corner held a hope, each brick a promise made in sweat and hardship. Defending it was not just a fight for property, but for my identity and dignity. Night after night, I worked methodically. I drafted letters, submitted inquiries, and prepared documentation that would serve as armor in a coming confrontation. The process was slow, deliberate, exactly as it needed to be. Unlike impulsive actions driven by anger, my moves were strategic, designed to corner and expose, without giving away my hand prematurely. I replayed their faces in my mind, once filled with innocence and trust, now twisted by greed and disdain. Their careless assumptions had left them vulnerable, and I was ready to exploit that. The house might be the battlefield, but the war was fought in ledgers, contracts, and laws. Despite the growing tension, I found a surprising calm settling over me. This was not a wild, desperate fight, but a controlled, calculated campaign. I drew strength from knowledge and patience, wielding them with the certainty of a man who knew the value of measured force. On one autumn afternoon, as sunlight spilled weakly through the kitchen window, I allowed myself a small, wry smile. Not from joy, but from the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming power from a place I was told no longer belonged to me. The man my children saw as obsolete was more alive and capable than ever. The atmosphere at home grew thick with unspoken unease. My children rushed ahead with their reckless schemes as if protected by invincibility, blind to the tightening web woven in silence around them. I could almost hear the first cracks forming beneath their veneer of confidence, the first signs that arrogance could be undone by something steadier, smarter. This was the turning point in a story they thought had already ended. The man they aimed to erase was rising anew, armed not with fists but with years of wisdom and a mind honed for strategy. I was no longer silent or powerless. I was ready. The battle had begun, not with noise or rage, but with the quiet, deliberate precision of a man who has been wronged, who understands the stakes, and who will undo the injustice not through sheer force, but through relentless patience and a clarity born of experience. For the first time in many months, I felt the certainty that the outcome was within reach. No longer the discarded father, I had become a strategist with a mission: reclaim what was mine, restore dignity, and ensure that betrayal would not go unanswered. The foundation I painstakingly laid began to solidify into a structure of undeniable strength, revealing more with each careful investigation. Document by document, I sifted through financial statements, tax returns, and contracts, sometimes buried beneath layers of years-old paperwork, sometimes hidden in digital files rarely revisited. In those solitary nights, with only the dim glow of a desk lamp illuminating my hands, the reality of their recklessness and my children's betrayal became painfully clear with a sharpness that both chilled and galvanized me. They had treated the family's finances like a wellspring to be tapped without care or consequence. Expenses inflated beyond reason, payments diverted without record, debts unreported and ignored. It was as if the legacy built over decades, the home we labored to maintain, was a mere prize to be liquidated quickly and without respect. Every reckless gesture was etched in the paper trail, a ledger of deceit far from the innocent ignorance I might have wished for. Their careless confidence was breathtaking. While they barked orders and whispered plans in arrogance, their actions revealed gaping vulnerabilities: missed deadlines for important contract renewals, unaddressed legal obligations, lapses in financial oversight. Each of these breaches was a fissure I was determined to exploit. With the steady, methodical discipline shaped by years of engineering, I began to construct a strategic response. To them, this was a chaotic scramble toward gain. To me, it was a puzzle of interconnected weaknesses waiting to be dismantled piece by piece. I focused on every minute detail: treating this as I had once treated the most complex designs. No angle too small, no detail too trivial. I reached out discreetly to a circle of trusted professionals, former colleagues, seasoned lawyers, financial auditors, all veterans of battles hidden in the fine print and legalese. These contacts became my silent allies in a war fought not with loud clashes, but with the quiet unraveling of facts. Their advice was tactical and guarded, warning me to value discretion and timing above all else. I was reminded that patience, not impulsivity, would be my greatest weapon. In the quiet of my home office, I composed letters and legal notices carefully crafted to initiate audits and investigations without alarming my adversaries prematurely. Letters to tax authorities flagged irregularities spotted in their filings. Formal inquiries to financial institutions requested detailed reviews of suspicious transactions. Claims were filed to challenge unauthorized asset transfers. Each was a carefully aimed thrust, designed to provoke scrutiny that could not be easily evaded. Within those slow, deliberate moves lay the heart of the campaign. It was not about quick victory, but suffocating their unsustainable scheme through layered pressure. The possibility of prolonged exposure was the wedge that could split their unified front. I began to notice changes in their behavior as invisible pressure mounted. Michael's hurried phone calls, filled with tension, Sarah's forced smiles at family meals, whispered arguments brewing beneath polite veneers. Their once confident facade was beginning to falter, revealing the strain that comes with unexpected resistance. When confrontation inevitably arrived, it came cloaked in fury and disbelief. Yet I met their barbs with guarded calm. I spoke in measured tones, deflecting accusations with evasive precision and silence when words were weapons. This restraint unnerved them far more than anger could, fueling a growing frustration that played into my hands. The household's unity unraveled fast. The alliances I once feared appeared brittle, now splintering under stress. Accusations and resentment festered where cooperation had once stood. Their collective arrogance ignored the reality that cracks in their alliance could widen into a chasm. In the eye of this storm, I found strength in the memories etched deep within my heart. I revisited the long years of sacrifice. Countless mornings repairing broken appliances, the nights spent battling exhaustion to sustain a family, the trials Maria and I bore silently for our children's futures. These recollections were not anchors dragging me down, but the fuel that propelled my efforts onward. I recalled the lessons long imparted about responsibility, integrity, and the need for discipline in all affairs. Lessons that had been cast aside, but that now gave me the sharp tools to combat their recklessness. I wielded these lessons with care, turning past teachings into present weapons. Weeks stretched into months as the strategy unfolded. Accounts were frozen at critical moments, denying them liquidity. Legal challenges delayed critical transactions, frustrating their plans to liquidate or exploit assets quickly. Audits and investigations loomed, prompting concerns that rippled through their carefully constructed world like persistent tremors. Even as the pressures shifted the tides, I maintained an unflinching calm. This was no impulsive battle fought with emotion. This was a war waged with deliberate precision, where every move was calculated to destabilize without unnecessary aggression. The home, our legacy, stood silent but resolute. Not merely brick and wood, but a symbol of decades of love and perseverance. It was my fortress, and I defended it with the patience and craft of a man who understood that true strength is often invisible. As tension rose, panic began to seep into their carefully cultivated confidence. Arguments flared, trust eroded, the family fissures widened, their unity fractured, and with each fragment came newfound openings. Their once seemingly unassailable front crumbled, exposing vulnerability born of greed and neglect. With every challenge met and every advance made, I sensed my own transformation solidify. The man who had once quietly borne betrayal was now a determined strategist, armed not with rage but with wisdom, patience, and an unwavering sense of justice. In reflection, memories of warmth bounced to the surface. The laughter around the dinner table, Maria's steadfast support, shared dreams built on sacrifice. These were not sentimental luxuries, but vital wares fueling a fight for what was rightfully mine. This war was no longer about punishment, but restoration of dignity, justice, and the shattered trust that had been discarded with careless ease. The documents I filed, the legal maneuvers I conducted, were stones laid carefully to rebuild what had been broken. Though the road was arduous and filled with resistance, I remained steadfast. My resolve was no fleeting fury, but a durable force, forged from years of experience, sacrifice, and love. They had sought to erase me, to erase all I had built, but I would not permit it. With measured steps and unshakable resolve, the unfolding struggle proved that even in the face of betrayal, the patient and the wise could endure and reclaim. The fight was complex and relentless, but carried the unmistakable certainty of eventual justice. The silence of this battle was deceptive, for beneath it roared the power of persistence and intellect. The war between a father wronged and his wayward children played out in subtle moves and quiet strategies, each action a testament to the strength of a man who refused to be broken. The struggle I had embarked upon was neither swift nor easy. It dragged itself like a slow, grinding gear, turning relentlessly beneath the surface of our fractured household. Each misstep by my children and their spouses, though masked by arrogance, became a foothold I could use to apply greater pressure. The relentless cascade of audits and legal wranglings sent ripples through their carefully built world, forcing them to confront consequences they had foolishly believed they could avoid. My movements were measured and deliberate, each step planned with the calculation of a seasoned architect. This was no battle of brute strength, but one drawn from decades of experience in crafting solutions to complex problems, where patience and precision were more powerful than haste or fury. I laid the groundwork with a calmness that belied the turmoil beneath. Frozen bank accounts curtailed their access to funds, legal filings challenged transactions, and investigations into financial discrepancies heightened scrutiny. Every restriction tightened the noose around their reckless ambitions. The panic that I sensed growing within their ranks was subtle but unmistakable. Michael's calls grew hurried and terse. Sarah's composure slipped under increasing pressure, her usual confidence replaced by nervous glances and hurried movements. Their whispered conversations, once filled with schemes and certainty, now thrummed with doubt and blame, a fragile alliance fraying thread by thread. I observed their unraveling not with cruelty, but with the tranquility of inevitability. When they confronted me, their rage was palpable. Accusations hurled in desperation, attempts to intimidate and undermine. But I met each onslaught with a resilience forged over years of hardship. My responses were measured, my silence when necessary, every word chosen to deflect rather than ignite. Each confrontation reinforced their uncertainty and bolstered my resolve. It was a chess match played out in controlled silence, where patience was my queen and vigilance my king. The family that had once swelled with proud unity now lay fragmented. Old resentments, long ignored, surfaced in harsh words and fractured trust. The greed that had driven their actions sown discord that split their front. I watched as their interactions became a battleground of suspicion and accusation, their shared secrets unraveling beneath the weight of scrutiny. Throughout this upheaval, I found strength in the small moments of remembrance. Maria's laugh echoing softly in my mind, the warmth of family gatherings long past, the quiet sacrifices made in invisible moments that wove the fabric of our life together. These memories were not mere comfort, they were the foundation of my persistence, the reason I refused to surrender. Each legal document I filed, every formal challenge mounted, was a brick laid in the restoration of what had been broken. This was a fight not of vengeance, but of reclamation, of dignity, trust, and the legacy Maria and I had built from our sweat and sacrifice. Though obstacles strewn before me were many, I met each with unyielding determination, grounded in the certainty of justice. Their desperation was a tangible force, manifesting in wild accusations and reckless confrontations that shook the household. Yet I remained above their tempest, steady and unshaken. I knew the power of calm persistence. I understood the devastation wrought by frantic attempts to evade the truth. My approach was slow but inexorable. My every move meticulously planned to dismantle their defenses. The fortress they had built around their entitlement began to crumble, block by block. Frozen accounts stalled their spending, legal freezes curtailed attempts to shift assets swiftly, and the creeping watch of auditors forced a reckoning they could no longer defer. The walls of their confidence cracked under the combined weight of evidence and consequence. Pressure fractured relationships that once seemed unbreakable. Suspicion poisoned interactions. Trust was replaced by venomous doubt. The familial bonds my years of sacrifice had nurtured were tested to their limits and found wanting in places. Yet these fractures only brought me closer to the heart of the problem, opening paths to further expose and correct the recklessness that had taken root. In moments of solitude, I often reflected on the journey. The fight was arduous and wore on my spirit, but the memories of better days, the shared laughter, Maria's unwavering support, the dreams nurtured through hardship, remained a guiding light. They reminded me that this battle was not just about material possessions, it was about restoring honor and preserving the life built with love and effort. My mission sharpened with every passing day, to reclaim what rightfully belonged to me, to restore the dignity robbed by betrayal, and to secure a future free from the shadow of greed and entitlement. The documents I prepared, the legal maneuvers I enacted, were all carefully placed foundations beneath what I intended to rebuild. Though the path was steep and resistance constant, my resolve only grew. It was not fleeting rage that drove me, but the steady force of conviction tempered by experience, sacrifice, and a profound understanding of justice. They had sought to erase me, to wipe away all I had built, but I stood firm, unyielding. This unfolding drama was complex and relentless, demanding all my strength and patience, yet it bore the unmistakable hallmark of eventual justice, a certainty that grew clearer with each strategic move. Beneath the surface, the silence of the battle concealed a roaring undercurrent of persistence and intellect. This was a war fought not with fists or fury, but with subtle moves and quiet strategies, a testament to a man who refused to break. I was no longer the discarded father, but a man reclaiming his rightful place. With every piece carefully played, every calculated step taken, I edged closer to restoring all that had been desecrated by betrayal. The fight was far from over, but the tide was turning. Steadily, assuredly, I was weaving the fabric of justice to mend the shattered bonds and reclaim the life I had built, with patience, precision, and unwavering resolve. The courtroom was more than just a room filled with judges, lawyers, and the weight of law. It was the arena where years of hidden pain and sacrifice would finally confront cold judgment and undeniable truth. As I sat there, waiting silently for the proceedings to begin, the shadows of the past seemed to settle around me, thick with memory and resolve. I carried with me every painstaking step taken, every quiet strategy woven beneath the surface, and the deep conviction of a man who had fought not out of anger, but out of necessity. When my name was called, I rose steady and certain. The weight of loss and betrayal was balanced by clarity and purpose. The faces before me were those I knew too well. Michael and Sarah, no longer children, but adversaries cloaked in the arrogance of entitlement. their once bright expressions dimmed by the gravity of this moment. Their spouses sat as spectators and participants, united by self-interest, yet exposed by the unraveling truth. I began with the facts. One by one, I presented the careful collection of documents, hard-won through patience and diligent investigation. Contracts ignored or secretly altered, finances misappropriated, debts concealed beneath layers of falsehood. My voice was calm, each word deliberate, as if recounting the blueprints of a house I had built brick by brick, now threatened by those I had raised. The home I built with my sweat and sacrifice was meant to be a haven, I said, my voice steady and weighted with years of experience and pain. But it became a playground for greed, a monument desecrated by betrayal. This is not just about money, it's about trust broken, promises shattered. The silence that followed was heavy yet expectant. The judge's eyes traced the evidence laid bare, the jasper truths impossible to refute. My children's faces betrayed the cracks in their confidence, expressions shifting from defiance to shock as their carefully crafted narratives gave way to the reality of law. I recounted my sacrifices with honesty, but no bitterness. The empty dinners, the long nights, the drafts and repairs made in quiet desperation, not as a plea for sympathy, but as the foundation of a case that called for justice. I worked to build a future for my family, I said, not a future they could claim without honor or gratitude. Testimonies followed, voices of those who understood the depth of my commitment and the extent to which betrayal had seeped. Each narrative underscored truths hidden beneath piles of paperwork, a mosaic assembled from years of devotion now marred by deceit. The proceedings unfolded with gravity and deliberation. The courtroom, once a theater for confrontation, became a chamber of reckoning. The judge weighed every argument, considered each piece of evidence, and examined the moral fabric that bound justice to truth. When the verdict was finally delivered, it was both a relief and a victory, not merely for me, but for every sacrifice endured and every trust violated. The judgment stripped away the arrogance and entitlement, exposing raw truths and imposing consequences commensurate with the betrayal. The judge's pronouncement was firm yet fair, reinstating the dignity I had fought to recover. Leaving the courtroom, I felt a lightness despite the arduous battle just concluded. The road ahead would not be free of scars or challenges, but the path to restoration was clear. I was no longer a discarded figure, but a man reclaiming his rightful place and voice. At home, the walls echoed with memories both sweet and bitter, remnants of a past life mingled with the promise of newfound peace. Each creak in the floorboard, each shutter against the wind, spoke silently of enduring strength. The house was no longer just a structure. It was a testament to resilience and justice restored. Though the family I once knew was permanently altered, the victory reaffirmed my worth beyond material belongings. I walked the familiar halls with renewed purpose, my steps steady on the foundation of truth and perseverance. The past's shadows remained, but they no longer controlled me. In moments of reflection, I felt Maria's presence, her love a quiet undercurrent in my resolve. The legacy we built together endured not simply because it survived, but because it was fought for with unwavering honor. Justice was not the end of my journey. It was the beginning of a chapter written with clarity, strength, and peace. Freedom, I realized, is never granted. It is claimed by those who understand their value and refuse to be diminished. I stood at that crossroads with a heart eased and a spirit renewed, ready to embrace the life reclaimed through wisdom, patience, and indefatigable will. The scars of betrayal would remain, but they would be marks not of defeat, but of survival and transformation. In reclaiming what was lost, I found more than restitution. I found myself. Returning home, the air felt heavy with memories that had settled over the years, some filled with warmth, others tinged with sorrow. Every creak in the floorboard, every faint whistle of wind slipping through the gaps in the windows, seemed to whisper the stories of lives intertwined with this house. It was more than timber and stone. It was the vessel of decades of laughter, tears, struggle, and love. But now it was also the silent witness to heartbreak and betrayal that had shaken its foundations. I stepped through the threshold with a heart both burdened and lightened. The courtroom battle had ended in my favor, a legal victory that restored not only what was materially mine, but something far more profound: my dignity and voice. For years, I had been passed over, dismissed by those I held most dear. But now, I stood reclaimed in the eyes of the law and, more importantly, in my own. As I wandered through the familiar rooms, I felt the weight of the past alongside a cautious hope for the future. Photographs dotted the shelves, the faces of Maria in happier days, my children when all was innocence and promise. Their smiles seemed frozen in time, innocent of the discord and greed that had eventually tainted our ties. The house absorbed my footsteps, steady and purposeful, as if listening to the story I carried in my bones. The family I once knew was irrevocably changed, some bonds fractured beyond repair. But even as the ache of loss lingered, I recognized a hard-earned relief. I was no longer invisible, no longer discarded. The court's vindication affirmed my value, beyond possessions, beyond accolades, a recognition of years spent building, sacrificing, and loving. In quieter moments, when the world slowed around me, I felt Maria's presence like a soft current beneath my resolve. Her voice, gentle yet firm in my memory, inspired my endurance and clarity. The legacy we had forged together hadn't just survived, it had been defended, and now stood stronger. Her strength became the beacon that guided me through the shadows of these trials. I thought often of the children I once embraced, before entitlement and impatience replaced respect and gratitude. Their betrayal left scars, thin lines etched deeply in the fabric of our shared past. Yet I held on to hope that time and reflection might heal some wounds, bringing understanding where there had been only division. This new chapter was born not of ending, but of restoration. It was not a tale of vengeance, but one of survival, dignity, and peace reclaimed. The foundation was firm beneath my feet, built on the truth, patience, and the promise to live authentically. Freedom, I realized, is not a gift granted lightly or freely by others. It is something fought for and seized by those who know their worth and refuse to be diminished. It is claimed through courage, perseverance, and the refusal to accept less than one's due. I looked at my reflection in the glass and saw more than years and trials. I saw resilience, wisdom, and a quiet strength emerging from the storm. No longer the silent sufferer, I was a man forged anew, standing tall with poised determination. The house, too, became a symbol of endurance, its walls and beams whispering tales of resilience. Each crack and creak was a testament to weathered storms and the hope that persists despite the ravages of time. The scars left by betrayal would remain, reminders not of defeat but of survival and transformation. They bore witness to the pain endured and the strength cultivated in its wake. In reclaiming what was lost, not just property or position, but self-respect and peace, I discovered a deeper victory. I found renewal, growth, and the quiet power that comes from standing firm against the tides of injustice. And so, with a heart steady and a spirit renewed, I turned toward the future. The path was mine to walk, shaped by wisdom and the certainty of my own worth. The story of my life was no longer one shadowed by betrayal, but illuminated by resilience and hope. The journey ahead carried the promise of peace earned through perseverance, a peace not given, but taken by a man who knew his value and refused to be undone.